So you're saying the stakes are really high here?
The stakes could not be higher. Today, as we're sitting here, he's 3.5 points ahead in the polls. He was ahead before President Biden had that very unfortunate debate, and the lead has been growing. But I have not seen anything remotely approaching the kind of plan we need to see out of the White House that can demonstrate that he can actually beat Donald Trump. People who think that this is just going to take care of itself because somehow when it's just a contrast between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that somehow the American people are just going to come around in the end and save the country, you know, from Donald Trump. I think we need to ask ourselves how we're in the position we're in today when he's already done all those horrible things.
The pressure to have Joe Biden step down from the presidential race and have a Democratic replacement is growing. Who you just heard from is a United States senator. In fact, the first United States senator, Senator Michael Bennet, to now raise alarm publicly in regard to Joe Biden, his very clear cognitive decline, and his low chances, nearly impossible chances of beating Donald Trump. And I say nearly impossible when you look at the polling. I think the evidence kind of bears that out, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But while a growing number of Democrats in the House seem to kind of like fall in line and begin supporting Biden, despite knowing what the vulnerabilities are here, Bennett expressed the reality of Biden's chances in beating Trump in November. Here's more of what he had to say.
You, Senator Jon Tester, and Senator Sherrod Brown all said during that lunch that you don't think President Biden can win in 2024. Is that true?
Well, it's true that I said that, and I did say that behind closed doors, and you guys and others asked whether I'd said it, and that is what I said. So I figured I should come here and say it publicly.
Why do you think he can't win in November?
I just think this race is on a trajectory that is very worrisome if you care about the future of this country. Joe Biden was 9 points up at this time. The last time he was running, Hillary Clinton was 5 points up. This is the first time in more than 20 years that a Republican president has been up in this part of the campaign. Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House.
Understand that that was a Democratic United States senator. He's not coming out and saying these things because he's attempting to assist Donald Trump in winning the general election, which is one of the wackier claims that you will hear from what has now been dubbed Blue MAGA on Twitter, on social media. These are individuals who have deluded themselves into thinking that Joe Biden absolutely should stay in the race. It doesn't matter that he is experiencing cognitive decline. Whoopi Goldberg, famously said she doesn't even care if he's pooping his pants. She will vote for anyone to defeat Donald Trump. But you also have to keep in mind that the majority of voters in this country are not Blue MAGA, including Democratic voters. There are Democratic voters who are absolutely concerned about Biden's mental decline. And more importantly, we all know that the presidential race ultimately ends up getting decided by independent voters, swing voters. And independent voters are not partisan hacks, and they're not individuals who feel this loyalty to one side or the other. And so there's a huge vulnerability here in that Biden doesn't have the loyalty of those kingmakers, of those individuals who are now watching the cognitive decline, seeing what's really playing out in the news in regard to all of his slip-ups, all of his memory lapses, all of his issues. And it is helping Donald Trump in the polls. And poll after poll now shows Trump with a pretty significant lead nationally, a significant lead in many of the swing states. And by the way, let me just remind you all, a lot of people were upset with me prior to the debate because we were covering the aggregates of those polls. We were covering the averages of those polls. And those polls indicated, even before the debate, that Trump had increased his lead in many of the critical battleground states that Biden would need to win in order to win re-election. And so I give you all of that context because, again, the people raising alarm, including Senator Bennett, are not individuals who are like secretly team MAGA or secretly rooting for Donald Trump. These are individuals who actually have the courage to tell it like it is, be honest about Biden's chances of winning the election, and it's because they don't want Donald Trump to win. They don't want another Trump term. And what I thought was really interesting about Bennett's interview was not only what he had to say about Biden's debate performance and his low likelihood of winning, it's what he had to say about Biden's behavior after the debate. And I think that what he says here is telling. It's something that Cenk has also said on this show, but it bears repeating. Let's watch.
And the White House in the time since that disastrous debate, I think has done nothing to really demonstrate that they have a plan to win this election, that they have a convincing plan to win in the battleground states where we have to win in order to win this election.
So
and they need to do that. They have to demonstrate that to the American people. And by the way, this is not about ignoring the American people's concerns. It's not about brushing off the American people's concerns. They have to address the American people's concerns. The people that I represent from Colorado have deep concerns about whether or not the president can win this race.
So it's not just donors or the media. You're saying it's your voters that have concerns.
These are my voters who said to me, I have been through this with my mom. I've been through this with my dad. I'm terrified about what it will mean if Donald Trump is elected president again in this country.
Thanks for watching. Our audience has helped build TYT into the media giant it is today. Together, we can accomplish anything. Support our work and join us at tyt.com/team. So not only did he draw attention to the fact that Biden hasn't really done what he needed to do following that debate. I mean, he had one interview with George Stephanopoulos. It was a short interview. We also learned that Biden did 2 smaller interviews with black hosts of 2 different radio stations, and his team fed them the questions ahead of time, and he bungled one of those interviews pretty badly. And so that has not really done anything to convince those voters who are in fact concerned. And that's the other thing that I wanted to point out about Bennett's statement there. I'm very happy about the fact that he drew attention to his own constituents, voters in his own state, who are Democrats and who are concerned about Biden's mental health and fitness to not only run again and win, but to serve another 4 years as president of the United States. This isn't a giant group of elitists who are going after Joe Biden. The elitists have rooted for Biden. In fact, one of the biggest elitists, Jeffrey Katzenberg, is the one who's trying to persuade people that Biden is totally fine. He's one of the big wealthy donors to the Biden campaign. So this idea that this is all about elites trying to retaliate against Biden and get rid of him, that is a ridiculous narrative to say the least. And it is insulting to Democratic voters who are in fact concerned about Biden's mental health, his fitness in office, and his ability to beat Donald Trump the second time around. Now, Bennett deserves credit for just telling it like it is, being very clear. He does get a ding for refusing to just simply say that Biden should drop out of the race. He just talked about the vulnerabilities of Biden, but he did so honestly, and I have a lot of respect for him for being able to do that, because I know the kind of harassment that anyone who tells the truth on this matter on the Democratic side gets, especially on social media. But if you're a politician, especially if you're a United States senator, I mean, you've got to grow a pair, and you've got to do the right thing and be honest with the American people. So again, Bennett gets credit for that. Who I feel does not deserve credit is Nancy Pelosi, who had an interview on MSNBC. And she was asked about whether she believes that Biden should drop out of the race. And she, to me, seems concerned about Biden for sure. But she's not really saying it. And more importantly, okay, she's playing this little game about how it's not really up to her. So let's take a look at what she had to say, and I'll break it down further.
Does he have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?
As long as the president it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore, but he's beloved, he is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do. And that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with. And I've said to everyone, let's just hold off. Whatever you're thinking, either tell somebody privately, but you don't have to put that out on the table until we see how we go this week.
In other words, hold off with your public statements about Biden. Let's keep this as private as possible. Let's conceal the reality from the American people and continue being the cowards that the Democratic Party has proven themselves to be over and over and over again. Now, as you can see from Biden's statement there, from Pelosi's statement about Biden, she's being evasive because she refuses to say what she feels Biden should do. And while she's no longer the Speaker of the House, she was the Speaker of the House and a Democratic leader in the House of Representatives for a long time, and is still seen as a leader in the House of Representatives, a leader in the Democratic Party. And so it would speak volumes if she actually had the courage to tell the American people on national television what she genuinely thinks. But what she tried to do there is kind of have her cake and eat it too, right? Because she talks about the Democratic caucus and how they clearly would like Biden to drop out, but she refuses to disclose what she herself feels that Biden should do. And she also makes clear that she will support whatever Biden decides. And right now, Biden is being incredibly selfish, incredibly delusional about his chances of beating Donald Trump. And so the idea that the Democrats should just sit back and wait for Biden to make the right decision on this is ridiculous to me, especially considering who is advising him behind the scenes. Yes, we've heard about Jill Biden, but now you have Hunter Biden advising Joe Biden to stay in the race. And I think that's absurd, to say the least. Now, after that interview, apparently there were some statements made about Nancy Pelosi that she didn't like, not the kind of statements I'm making here. So apparently Pelosi had insisted after that MSNBC interview that she did not mean for her comments to be taken as a vote of no confidence when it comes to Biden. She argued that there are some misrepresentations of what I had to say. Well, Pelosi, you were intentionally evasive in that interview, so it's easy to have whatever interpretation anyone wants to have about her statements. But according to senior Democratic aide, Pelosi knew what she was doing and said, Morning Joe is the president's favorite show. Pelosi knows he's watching. I mean, how Trumpian is this? Like, I just love how Democrats were like super critical of Trump and his obsession with Fox News or watching Fox News. And now they're like, Biden loves MSNBC. Everyone knows that he's watching this MSNBC show. Okay, all right, but let me continue. So Morning Joe is the president's favorite show. She knows he's watching. She's not an idiot. She chose those words carefully. So at least one person, a Democratic aide, made clear that they feel that there was like a subliminal message in what Nancy Pelosi was saying there. I think Nancy Pelosi, much like every other elected Democrat, is worried that Joe Biden's gonna lose and he's gonna drag down the entire Democratic Party along with him if he refuses to step down. I think that's what Nancy Pelosi actually thinks. Obviously, I'm speculating because I'm not in her head and I don't know for sure. But what I do know, and this is based on reporting, you have all of these Democrats in Congress speaking to reporters saying, oh, we want him to step down, we're not happy about this is terrible. But they refuse to say anything publicly about it because they're afraid of retaliation from their own party. It's insane. We can't say the right thing. We can't say what the correct course of action moving forward should be because we're worried about besmirching Biden and facing retaliation for it. That's what's really happening here. There's a lot of cowardice all around in the Democratic Party. Now, it's not just Democratic lawmakers, though, who are concerned about Biden. TMZ obtained a video from a pedestrian who ran into George Stephanopoulos, who, of course, interviewed Joe Biden last week following Biden's disastrous debate performance. There's a screenshot of the video in question. And since we don't have rights to the video, I'm going to go ahead and read a transcript of what was said. The pedestrian asked him, do you think Biden should step down? You've talked to him more than anybody else has lately. And Stephanopoulos says, I don't think he can serve 4 more years. So that's what he really thinks. And by the way, as the video was recording, it was facing down at the sidewalk. So obviously George Stephanopoulos had no idea that he was being recorded as he gave a candid answer like a real human being. But after the fact, he, I guess, felt bad about it and said that he shouldn't have answered a question from a passerby. I'm happy that he did answer that question from a passerby, because now we know exactly what George Stephanopoulos thinks, and it is relevant considering, he is somewhat closer to Joe Biden than other members of the media, and he did have that recent interview with Joe Biden. Finally, in an op-ed for the New York Times, George Clooney urged Biden to step down. Now, George Clooney's not a politician, he is an actor, but he's a huge Democratic donor, and in fact was part of a fairly recent fundraiser for Joe Biden. And I'm gonna read a few excerpts from the op-ed that he wrote in the New York Times saying, quote, "We are not going to win in November with this president. On top of that, we won't win the House and we're going to lose the Senate. This isn't only my opinion. This is the opinion of every senator and Congress member and governor that I've spoken with in private. Every single one, irrespective of what he or she is saying publicly." And we know a lot of the people concerned privately are unwilling to say a damn thing publicly. I can't stand how cowardly people are, okay? It makes me pretty sick, especially when these are the exact same people who are consistently, incessantly talking about the threat of Donald Trump publicly. If you see Donald Trump as a threat, then maybe you should act like it. So Clooney continues to write, "It's devastating to say it, but the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe big effing deal Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. As Democrats, we collectively hold our breath or turn down the volume whenever we see the president, who we respect, walk off Air Force One or walk back to a mic to answer an unscripted question." Now, the Biden campaign didn't like that op-ed. And I think what you're about to see is more indication that Biden continues to dig his heels in. So let's go to the next clip.
In response to those comments from George Clooney, Jake, a campaign official who attended that Los Angeles fundraiser tells me that George Clooney left 3 hours before the president. So clearly the gloves are off. Jake?
But what does that mean that George Clooney left 3 hours? What's the point?
The point of that is to suggest that Biden's stamina is better than Clooney's, and Clooney didn't have eyes on the entire event. That's the response to the Clooney op-ed.
Okay.
Okay, is really that's the argument? That's the latest insane claim? That Joe Biden has more stamina than George Clooney? Really? Really? The biggest issue is that Biden will lose to Trump and he will drag down the Democratic Party along with him. Okay, the polls bear that out. In my opinion, the second giant issue, and this is something that maybe bothers me more than other people, and that's fine if that's the case. I am so sick of the disrespect that Democratic voters are receiving from the Biden camp right now. Allegations of bedwetting, allegations that Joe Biden is actually this guy with so much stamina, he's a dynamo, so energetic. This idea that everything that we all saw with our own 2 eyes, everything that we heard with our own 2 ears in that 90-minute debate was all a figment of our imaginations and we're the crazy ones. That is so incredibly insulting to voters. And they just keep doing it, and they feel emboldened to do it because there is, unfortunately, a small group of Democratic voters, the blue MAGA crowd, who will defend Biden to the death. I don't even know how real this crowd is because everyone's basing it off of social media activity. What's amazing to me is how many people, both in the media and in the Democratic caucus, are so afraid of social media mobs that they will literally avoid saying publicly what they really think privately. Really, you're afraid of social media mobs? That's what you're afraid of. And you're leading this country to some extent. You make decisions about legislation that impacts all of our lives as a pathetic coward. Anyway, but I don't know, maybe most voters aren't bothered by being insulted by Democratic lawmakers in the Biden camp. I know I am, and I'm sick of it. I'm not gonna fall for it. I'm not gonna buy the lies. I know what I saw, I know what I've heard. And this mental decline thing isn't new. This was an issue when Biden was running in 2020. His condition clearly has only gotten worse since then. And if he remains in this race, moving forward, there will be more examples amplified in the media of Biden experiencing mental decline. He will lose the election. He will drag the Democratic Party along with him. And the Republican Party is hoping he stays in the race.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.